So tonight we are right in the middle of a very important clash between the Trump administration and the courts. And it has been rapidly developing and escalating over the past 48 hours or so. As we talked about on Friday night's show, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is a law that is a wartime law in this country. It's used during wartime only. The last time it was used was during World War II, when it was used to put Japanese Americans in internment camps, something for which the US government later apologized and paid reparations under Ronald Reagan. Nevertheless, in an unannounced written statement this weekend, Donald Trump claimed that that was the law he would use as the basis for deporting people who he determined to be members of a Venezuelan gang. He would use that law to deport people immediately, without any due process or any legal consideration at all. Organizations, including the ACLU, sued immediately to block him from using that 1700s law. The chief judge of the Washington, D.C. Federal District Court held an emergency hearing on the ACLU's lawsuit late Saturday afternoon. And at that hearing, the ACLU's lawyer, Lee Galern, told that judge that it was his understanding that planes were about to take off, or possibly had taken off during the hearing, carrying hundreds of men out of this country toward a prison in El Salvador. There was a Trump administration lawyer there representing the government. That lawyer said he couldn't give the judge any information about that at all. So again, this was an emergency hearing late on Saturday, and the judge ended up basically saying, listen, there are difficult questions of law here, and these are going to have to be worked out in the courts. For now, I am blocking the Trump administration from deporting people under this law from the 1700s. They are blocked from using this law as the basis for these deportations until we can hash out these legal questions. So the judge actually said to the Trump administration lawyer, quote, "You shall inform your clients," meaning inform the Trump administration, "of this immediately. You should inform them that any plane containing these folks that's going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States. Those people need to be returned to the United States. Quote, this is something that you need to make sure is complied with immediately." By all appearances, that order was not complied with immediately. NBC News reports that 2 flights carrying these men were in transit when the judge issued his ruling, but they did not turn around. They continued on their way. The Washington Post reports that a 3rd plane was still on the ground at the time of that ruling. It hadn't taken off in Texas until after that judge's ruling had been issued. The next morning, the pro-Trump president of El Salvador announced that his country had accepted 238 men from the United States. He posted a slickly produced 3-minute propaganda video of some of these men being sort of manhandled and pushed around, and all of them having their heads shaved by armed Salvadoran military or security forces. President Trump happily posted the video as well. President of El Salvador says these men will be jailed in a massive prison in his country for as many years as the U.S. wants to pay him to keep them there. They have not been charged with crimes and thereby sentenced to serve this time. They're just being locked up indefinitely at the pleasure of El Salvador. At the White House press briefing today, Trump's press secretary listed all the crimes these men ostensibly committed, but a senior Trump administration official tells NBC News that these men have not necessarily been convicted of any of these crimes. Still, though, they're in prison now in El Salvador indefinitely, having been disappeared out of this country with no process whatsoever. We don't even know who these guys are. They keep saying they're Venezuelan gang members. We don't even know if they're Venezuelans, let alone gang members. Unsurprisingly, the federal judge who held that hearing on Saturday, where he made it abundantly clear that nobody was supposed to be sent to El Salvador, he called a new hearing today to assess whether the Trump administration had knowingly violated his court order. Quote, a federal judge pressed a Justice Department lawyer today over why the Trump administration did not comply with his order to temporarily halt deportations under an 18th century law, and asked why key information about the flights was being withheld over the weekend. In a tense hearing, the judge summarized the administration's position on his court order Saturday as, quote, we don't care, we'll do what we want. The Trump administration lawyer at this evening's hearing still refused to provide any information about the flights. And so the judge has now ordered another hearing for tomorrow at noon, at which the Trump administration must give him the information he wants or explain the legal rationale for why they are not giving it to him. And if they don't, then, well then. Hanging in the balance immediately is the fate of untold numbers of people who Donald Trump may try to send to this Salvadoran prison. The president of El Salvador has said openly that he'd be happy to put U.S. citizens there too. But also hanging in the balance is whether the Trump administration is considering not just trying to wheedle their way out of it, but whether they're considering openly flouting a court order, which is a very fast trip down a very short street in terms of how much of a republic we still are. Joining us now is Lee Gallant, Deputy Director of the ACLU's Immigrant Rights Project, who has been facing off with the Trump administration in these court hearings. Mr. Gallant, I know that you haven't slept a wink and that you are very busy and under a ton of stress. Thank you for making time to be here.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
Did I explain any of that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, sorry. You got it all correct, and I think set it up nicely. And I would just start by saying that, you and I have talked about a lot of big issues over the years. I think right now, this is one of the biggest that we've ever discussed. And for two reasons. One is the use of this wartime authority is so unprecedented and so dangerous during peacetime that we all need to be concerned, because right now it's Venezuelans who are being tagged with it and sent off to a Salvadoran prison without any due process whatsoever. But if the courts allow this, it could be one group after another that's just whisked away and put in a Salvadoran prison with no access to anybody. And these Venezuelan men who have been sent to El Salvador, as the video already suggests, are in real danger. But the second reason this is so big is what you also talked about, is beyond just the Alien Enemies Act, the Trump administration seems to be basically saying the federal court should stay out of their business. But of course, our entire country is premised on the idea that we have three equal branches of government, and both Congress and the president will listen to the federal courts. We were very concerned that the administration just simply ignored, violated the court's order to turn their planes around. And so we told the judge we were concerned about it, given all the facts. He said, let's get in here for a hearing. We left that hearing even more concerned than we were initially. I mean, the administration tried to first say, well, we didn't think you meant this and that, but obviously they clearly understood what the order meant. They're basically just saying, don't interfere with us. And they even went as far as going to the DC Circuit a few hours before the hearing to try and get the judge thrown off the case. I mean, this is really extraordinary. And what I said in the hearing was, I wanted to be very careful with my words, but I felt like, although a lot of people throw around the term constitutional crisis, we were moving in that direction if the administration is really not going to allow federal courts to do their job.
What options does the judge have if the judge concludes the worst here, that the administration is deliberately flouting his order? What could the judge do to bring the administration into compliance?
Yeah, so I think that's the right question. So the judge will have all the normal types of sanctions and contempt orders that he can issue. But, truthfully, we are much more concerned with our clients who are now sitting in Salvadoran prison. Generally speaking, a federal court cannot order another country to do something. We think this may be different because we actually think that El Salvador is almost like serving as a private prison, with the U.S. footing the bill. And so we were going to, for sure, if he finds that they violated the order, we are for sure going to ask him to get these men back, because there's no question the United States government has the leverage to do it. And we're going to say they're still constructively in U.S. custody. But, that will be our first concern. Whatever other sanctions or contempt orders we ask for, I think, will be a secondary concern.
I mean, honestly, without any explanation about whatever special relationship we have with El Salvador to be able to do this, you think about the other leaders around the world that Trump considers himself to be in common cause with, and he considers to be like of his marching order. And if they do this, why aren't they then going to send other groups of people in this country to Hungary or to Serbia or to North Korea or to Russia? I mean, picking picking a random country abroad and saying, well, they're out of our, they agreed to take these people. We sent them with zero due process. We just rounded them up and sent them. And this other country will do with them what they will. I mean, there's no bottom to that once it starts.
Oh, for sure. You know, and what we have said is two things. One is that this wartime authority cannot be used because Congress has said very, very clearly it can only be used where the United States is in a declared war with a foreign nation, or a foreign nation is invading us. If the president can just simply say, well, every time we think there's a criminal group that's dangerous, no matter what nationality, we're going to just send them off, that's very dangerous. But the other part of this is that there's zero due process. So let's just assume for the moment that the Alien Enemies Act can be used against a non-state actor. You know, and we're clear that it can't be. But even if it could, you have to give these individuals some due process to show that they're not part of the gang and then therefore don't fall within the proclamation. Our 5 named plaintiffs dispute that they're part of the gang. I think we're going to see people when their families are finally reached and they've seen photos and videos of these men being taken to El Salvador, come forward, and we're going to see people show that they're not gang members. And we don't know for sure who was who because the government did this all in secret. But I would just caution people not to buy in immediately to the government's characterization of all these people. I mean, think about Guantanamo. They said these are the worst of the worst we're sending to Guantanamo. It quickly, very quickly became clear that many of the people didn't even have a criminal conviction, much less a serious criminal conviction. And so I think we all need to take a beat on whether we think, whether we buy into this characterization, but they certainly shouldn't be entitled to a hearing to show they're not part of the gang.
Right. Yeah. Legal Alert, Deputy Director of the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project. I realize this fight is very much joined and this is still developing. You got another hearing tomorrow. Thanks for helping us understand it tonight and keep us apprised.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right, more news ahead here tonight. Stay with us.